Hi everyone, my name is Darryl Panes, CEO of As Good as Gold Australia, and today once again I'm joined by my brother Brian and partner at As Good as Gold.
Good morning, Darryl.
Brian, and this morning we interview David Morgan from the Morgan Report, an advisor of course to As Good as Gold Australia. Good morning, David.
Good morning to you both.
Good morning, David.
Well, it's good for us. It's a good morning for us, but not so much for Sydney-siders. Those living in western suburbs are under the pump at the moment, aren't they, Brian?
We were just talking about that. It's a jail sentence for them.
It is. That's how it goes on. Look, we've got lots to talk about. I know the Dow overnight dropped 260 points and gold was up again. It's recovered from slight losses and it's back over 1,800. There's always lots to talk about. But before we do so, Brian and I have got, and David have got a pretty special announcement, haven't we, Brian?
Absolutely.
We've been working on this for a while and it's finally come to fruition. So for all of our viewers out there, in particular, US and Canadian citizens, we'd like to announce that we are now open for business in the US and Canada. That's right, we're open for business in the US and Canada. So it's exciting times for As Good as Gold Australia, and we're looking forward to connecting with all of our new prospective clients out there that have been following us for years. Really looking forward to it. So a couple of things that I'd like to highlight. So our viewers can now go to our website, www.asgoodasgoldaus.com.au, and click on the international link. This will take you to the products that are available to ship within the United States and Canada. We want to start by listing some of the most popular gold and silver products on the market, but we will be adding to this range consistently. So now, when placing an order, you want to make sure that the prices are being quoted in your local currency. If the prices haven't already defaulted to your local currency, you can change this manually by going to the top right-hand corner of our website and selecting USD or CAD from the currency selector drop-down. Once your order has been confirmed, you'll receive an email with our USD or CAD bank account details depending on the currency you have selected. By hovering over the products, you can click Quick View to bring up the dialog, which will display the quantity discounts. If you click View Details, you can check the availability of products and further product information. Just a final reminder that we do have a minimum order value of $3,500 per order. However, you will be, of course, eligible to receive our most competitive pricing based on the quantity you are ordering. All products ship directly from Las Vegas, so once your order's been dispatched, it should arrive within just a couple of days. Now, David, I believe that you have a special offer for our USA and Canadian-based viewers.
We do. There's a coupon code available, and you will get the best price available on any given day. Markets fluctuate up and down every day. That code is Silver Guru, SILVRGURU. Hit the cap locks key and type in Silver Guru, and you will get an additional discount.
Thank you so much for that, David. Look, it's great. It's exciting times.
Yeah.
Yep. And of course, what I would like to suggest too is that to all of our viewing audience, if you subscribe, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. So that'll give you the opportunity of seeing new products as they're introduced and any specials that may be on offer at the time. And so you'll be first to get a look at that. So without further ado, I guess,
Let's go.
yeah, we've got, as I said before, plenty to talk about. David, my first question is with reference to Basel III. A lot of talk about Basel III and what the expectations might be after that. Some people might have thought that they could expect to see an immediate increase in the price of precious metals. Interesting to see what people's take is on this. But here's my question. Basel III is behind us, but the impact of the policy changes to our banks and financial institutions is ahead of us. ETFs, unallocated metals, are no longer considered tier one, but bullion is. So what impact do you believe that these policy changes are going to have on precious metals prices over the next, well, I'd like to look at, say, maybe over the next 6 months leading up to the end of the year, and then maybe 12 months to 2 years. Could you give us some feedback on that, your view?
Darryl, I'll be happy to. So I did an update for our premium members, and I think I think I addressed it last time we spoke. I said I didn't think it was that big a deal, but I didn't know. And as you say, it really isn't implemented all the way through in different jurisdictions for a few more months. It will probably cause some of the banks to drop out of their gold silver desks. So, for example, Scotia Makata used to be Makata. They were the largest option writers in the OTC market that existed. Then they merged with Scotia, became Scotia Makata. Then they dropped the Makata. It was still Scotia. They were probably way over leveraged, and they're just basically folded up their tent and moved on. I think I see more of that. I think you see wider spreads. I think it's basically good for the market, but I'm not as exuberant as some of my peer group. The best article, I think, written on it, and it wasn't by me, it was, I think, by Matterhorn. And I forget the gentleman's name, and I'd reference it. It was on King World News, and I think posted in a few other places. That was about the most level-headed and objective look at what Basel III really means. So is it going to have an effect? Yes. Is it going to be substantive? I'm not so sure. I will say, and I want this to be really well heard, that gold's going far higher with or without Basel III. My two main criticisms about it are, one, why would the bankers create a rule that inhibits them? And you can look at it in kind of the reverse. If gold bullion is not a tier one asset and becomes one, that means it's more valuable, which means you can hypothecate more of it. Think about that. So if you have an asset, you're only able to hypothecate 80% of its dollar value. And the law changes to where now you can hypothecate 100% of its value. Does that increase or decrease the amount of derivatives? On the other hand, where I'm a little fuzzy, and this article did a pretty good job, and I can't repeat it back exactly where I would, the unallocated to me is still a bit fuzzy. It looks like it will be contracting, and that's beneficial to all of us. And here's my last statement, probably the most important of all. Are you guys got your seatbelts on? Ready?
I didn't have, but I'm fastening them now.
Put it on, tighten it up, because here it comes. I would like to know, Brian and Darryl, when in the heck did these banks ever follow any of these rules anyway?
Yep. Banks,
I mean,
banks
really, let me dwell on that just a second longer.
Yeah, I bet you will.
But it's not funny. But I mean, you've got these position limits. They don't obey those. You've got, congestion in the market, which is obvious, massive sellings of paper, silver, and gold at times. No complaints. You get all kinds of lawsuits. I think there were like 3 or 4 that consolidated them. The court made them put it into a, combined lawsuit. It was dropped. GATA, went into court against them years and years ago. And basically the court said, it was, secret information held on the financial system and they couldn't disclose it. I mean, so again, I repeat, even if everything that, let's say, the most gold, good for gold that could possibly happen by the best interpretation of Basel III in the positive side, so the banks will obey it. And I really say that in all seriousness. I'm not trying to be funny. I'm not being facetious. I'm being real. They don't follow the rules. So there you go. And then again, following up, gold's going higher, much higher. And the reason it's going much higher is because everything else is crumbling around it. We have a massive contraction in the global economy from a physical standpoint, not from the amount of money being able to be printed. Seems like that's on fire. It just keeps going higher and higher. But as far as supply chains disruptions, semiconductor, food disruptions, less meat, all this rhetoric about propaganda after propaganda, lockdowns tightening down more and more, less freedom and less freedom. A lot's going on in the real physical world that people need to be concerned about. And one of the things about gold is it's as good as gold. You've got to have something. If you have any financial savings whatsoever at all, some of it must, and I repeat the word must, be in the precious metals at this time. Don't delay. Don't worry about the premiums. Get some and get it as soon as you can. I never have given the fast sell card before. I'm doing it now because I'm concerned about everything I just said and the cyber pandemic. I think that this forward-thinking propaganda machine known as the World Economic Forum that's doing this cyber polygon that they've done 2 years previously that starts tomorrow may not, probably will not turn into the real thing. But we've already had this oil pipeline situation. We've had the JBS meat packing system break in. We had another one on retail. And I think those are trial balloons for, let's say, a cyber attack of more substance than those, which were quite substantive. So you don't want to panic buy. You want to buy when you can get it. Supply chains are open. Deliveries are good. And just do it right. What does right mean? And Darryl and Brian might not agree with me, but look, you need to have some, but you don't need to put your life savings in the metals. But you really need to have some as protection, because if this fiat fiasco finally hits the fire pit of destiny, meaning it's destroyed because so much of it's printed that it becomes worthless. And we will probably have a deflation before we get to that point, but the ignition point has already been lit. You are going to use, or maybe use directly, precious metals, or if not, you're going to be able to exchange them just for what you absolutely need or want to buy. So end of pitch, but I really never get that hot about urgency. But I really think because of the cyber pandemic that I see not too far away, you'd rather have it sooner than later. The old adage, I'd rather have it 6 months too early than 6 minutes too late.
Yeah, David, look, I'm not all in precious metals, but I do believe in the philosophy that Jim Rickards refers to, and that is gold, fine art, and land. It's just that I don't believe, I'm not supportive 100% of his percentages. I'm 90% precious metals, 5% fine art, and 5% land. I think that's a pretty good combo. Brian?
Yeah, look, absolutely, I agree, but I don't have any Picassos. I have 0% in fine art at the moment. David, yeah, like I agree. Obviously, we agree with what you've just said, and Darryl and I continue to buy monthly, quarterly. Whenever we put a few more shackles together, that's what we buy, because I see no need at all to put money in, or currency in the bank. It's absolutely useless there. So, David, I'm going to put two questions together. One's going to be, the first one is about inflation, and the other one is going to be about central banking and what they're doing today. But to move forward, inflation. There's the most talked about subject, in my opinion, and certainly in the last 6 months, is inflation. Jim Rickards will say that inflation continues around 1.52% because there is no velocity. I'm not quite sure the description of velocity, but that's what he says. Then there is John Williams of Shadow Stats, who says the real inflation rate is 11 to 12%, because he goes back from charts from the mid-80s. I say that if you change the description of the word inflation, you can come up with any figure you like. So, for example, mid-1980s, the CPI was calculated by a basket of goods containing all items that you purchased. In the early 2000s, it was changed, so items like food, energy, and even real estate was removed because they were too volatile. Well, I just can't get along with that, because food and energy, you cannot survive without the two. Today, the average price another point. Today, the average price worldwide to ship a 40-foot container has more than quadrupled in the last year. And it's actually up 53% from 2 months ago. My question, David, why do politicians and newsreaders ignore these facts? And are we headed into the 1970s inflation era?
Well, they deliberately ignore the facts because it is, bears on the interest rate that the bond market has. Obviously the interest rate is the return or the cost of money. And if the real inflation rate was reported by officials, then the interest on the national debt wouldn't be financed at the 2% or 1.5%, 1.6% on the 10-year, near 2% on the 30-year. And it would be in the range of what John Williams calculates, let's round it up to 10%. So if you have a credit card and you're making the minimum payment and you can just make it at, a 2% interest rate, and then that interest rate goes up 5 times, you won't make the minimum payment. It's similar on the national debt, although we just keep adding to the debt. And there's this debt ceiling that every several months, the Congress critters vote to increase the debt limit. What a surprise. The point is that is deliberate to keep the interest payment on the national debt low. That's question number one. Are we in the 1970s? The answer is not yet. We do have countervailing forces, and both Jim and John are correct. Jim is correct if you use the official numbers. John is correct if you use the basket that you outlined in the 1980s. If you come to present day, we have a lot of static money, meaning the banks have produced it, but it's sitting on the bank's balance sheet. It's not going into Main Street. It's sitting there. So the money that sits in a bank and doesn't move is zero velocity. It means it's not in the economy. Remember, the metaphor for a bank is the banks of a river, and the river is a metaphor for cash flow. And the faster the cash flows held by the banks, the better the velocity. So that's the analogy or the metaphor for how the system works. So the faster the river is flowing, contained by the banks, the more velocity, which means a greater turnover. But inflation, and I'm one of, I think, the few making this point, not only is it a monetary phenomenon, meaning that by definition, if you print up a lot of it, you've set the groundwork for inflation, let's say it that way. But it's more psychological than mathematical. I mean, we had a lot of increase in the money supply year over year, yet we've had times when gold went up and times when it went sideways and times when it went down. But the whole time, the money supply just keeps increasing. Yes, it goes up and down like any market, but it's basically up. The trend is definitely up. So it's the psychology. And this is where I have a bit of a difference of opinion with my peer group, or a lot of them. Once inflation gets in the psychology of the masses, your average person out there doesn't invest in the stock market. They don't know what M1, M2, or M3 are. All they know is what they pay for food and gasoline. And once they get the psychology that inflation's here, they don't care if the Fed tapered, or the Fed is not buying as many bonds, or they cut out some of their mortgage-backed security purchases or whatever. They don't know any of that, and they don't care. All they care about is how much are they paying for a can of tuna fish this week compared to what they paid 2 months ago. And I'm not trying to be cute. I'm absolutely spot on here. And that psychology is what will run the market. Remember, economies aren't a bunch of math numbers with a bunch of math quants going through all these details on computer models. And that's what it's become. It's millions of decisions by millions of people every day making purchases. That's what the economy really is from a physical point of view. And that can't be predicted. But what can be predicted, from my perspective, studied one, is that once that psychology gets into the people, that they're going to, whatever it is that they're buying that they need is going to cost more, they are not going to shake off that idea. It's going to continue, regardless of what the Fed does to taper, mess around with interest rates, or cause the reserve requirements to be increased, or try to tighten up the money supply by all the various methods that they have available. Not to say we couldn't see some deflationary forces. I think we will. But the psychology, in my opinion, won't change, at least not for the masses. It might for the bankers, it might for some investors, it might for family offices, but for the people at large, I don't think it will. So now the next step is whoever in that mass of people that have any savings are going to look at what they can do with it. Can they buy more food? And that will be something a lot of people will do. And the other part, people beyond that means, or that level, will look to where can they purchase something that will hold its value. And guess what? I think you both know what the answer to that is: precious metals. So I'm afraid that we are getting near the end of the great Keynesian experiment one more time, the fiat fiasco. It's going to catch fire. It's going to go to zero, more or less. I mean, I need to correct myself. People listen to me and I think that I'm predicting that the dollar will go to absolute zero. I do not. There will be a new financial system that comes to replace the dollar as the perception that the dollar is heading toward absolute zero is taking place. Or maybe it's even in a deflationary environment, which I doubt very much, but I wouldn't rule it out, that the financial banking elite authorities come on and say, we're going all digital, central bank digital currency. Your bank account balance will not change. You just will not be able to get paper currency out of an ATM anymore. All ATMs are null and void as of March 1st, 2022. The new system is enacted. No matter what your bank balance is, you're only allowed to spend $300 a week. And yeah, we know it costs $400 for a loaf of bread, but good luck.
Great answer. I can only add to that, David, that if the world introduces digital currencies and there's no ATMs, your privacy goes out your window, because everything will, we have enough tracking now, let alone if you can only use digital currencies and the government is the only allowable source of that digital currency. Your privacy will be non-existent. I want to move on to central banks, David.
I'd just like to make a point, if I could, Brian.
Please,
just like to make a point
Absolutely.
on the inflation side of things. I had a very good friend many years ago. She said, Darryl, when I found that somebody told me a lie, I then asked myself the question, how many other times have they lied to me? And I think at the moment that we've got lots of people lying about inflation, and we've spoken about that. But one great illustration here, you've got the Fed talking about a transitory phenomenon. And the wording can be quite spectacular, can't it? Transitory phenomenon, brief, temporary. And yet you've got the Bank of America, who just stated that they expect to see high levels of inflation for the next 4 years. They can't get their act together, can they? No. And we're reliant upon these people, or the vast majority of the populace are reliant on these people for information, and yet they can't get it right between them. Who do you believe, David? It would appear neither of those two.
No, I don't trust the establishment much at all, as you know. And
no.
I think you've got to look at history as our best guidance and look at what's happened in countries, current day. The only reason we don't have like a Venezuela or an Argentina or a Turkey or Zimbabwe is because we have such advanced capital markets, meaning the bond markets, and the credit markets have served us well for a long time. I won't deny that. But now we're at the point of no return. We're at a point where you can print the heck out of anything and it's very meaningless. Whenever you have a lot of something, it loses value. And if the price of money is very low, it means it's not very valuable. If money was if currency was valuable, it would cost a lot. It doesn't. It costs next to nothing. And so we're at the end game. The other way you can look at it is, well, let's go back to, my youth, talking when I was 40 years ago, 4 decades ago, 2 generations ago. If you had $1 million at 10%, you were getting $100,000 a year interest. and you had a very, very, very high lifestyle. Now, if you have about 5 million or maybe even 10 million at about 1.5%, which is about what the 10-year is at, you're getting 150,000 a year. Well, 150,000 40 years further down the road from 2 generations ago buys a heck of a lot less. And it sounds like a big number, but it really isn't, at least for a lot of city dwellers. So my point is, what $1 million used to buy 40 years ago has been hyperinflated to 10 times that amount, to go from an extremely high lifestyle to a more than get by lifestyle. I'm not trying to say that number is meaningless. It's a pretty good sized number, but it does not buy the same lifestyle that it did 2 generations ago. So the interest rate is held low, as we already discussed, and it helps the government, because as they inflate further and further, it makes it easy for them to pay off the debt. And the higher the cost of money, the more difficult it is.
Yeah.
It does. It reminds me of, you go back a number of years, obviously, when about my school years and younger school years. I mean, my mum and dad, my mother never worked, all right, up to probably up to the age where I was about 20 years. I think she helped dad out in the business. But I remember mother never earning an income. Dad would bring home. He was in manufacturing. He would be in the automotive industry, and we only needed. We never went without. We only needed one income to do well, pay off the house, pay the bills, right? Mum look after the children and all those sorts of things. And 2 incomes was just unheard of. But everybody says, well, we're doing well these days, but there's always mum and dad have to go to work. They have to work in 40 hours a week, 38 hours a week over here. And I think people are overlooking this fact these days, that the bottom line, our dollars, they might have more dollars, but you got to earn a lot of them to be able to even survive. Otherwise, you sell up in the central part of Adelaide, and you go 50 kilometres north because you can't afford the living standard as mum and dad used to. So the more dollars doesn't mean more prosperity. On this question of central banks, David, central banks are buying gold. Don't let anybody tell you that they're not interested in having more gold in their stores. Russia just released in July this year, 2021, is about to increase their gold supply by 380 tonne. By the way, Russia is the second largest producer of gold, just ahead of Australia by a couple of tonne per year, but they produce 330 per year, so obviously they're going to be buying out from outside sources, not just their own. Thailand, these are some of the facts and figures that we must think about. Thailand in May bought 46 tonne. Brazil bought 11.9 tonne. Kazakhstan bought 5.3 tonne. Poland 2 tonne. India 0.9 of a tonne. Serbia, you never hear of the country Serbia, but bought 14 tonnes over 12 months. The World Gold Council said that central banks have increased their purchases by an average of 43% year to date. My question, David, can you explain why central banks are increasing their purchases by 43%, but less than 1% of the population own gold?
Excellent question. You answered your own question. I mean, central banks have been net purchasers of gold from 2011 onward. And this 43% increase is pretty astronomical relative to what they average, because they see what's coming. If you go to the Bank of International Settlements, which is now private, but at one time you could actually own stock in it, and you could read their annuals, they only looked at what the gold holdings were of all the member banks. They didn't look at what the currency positions were. Reminds me of the movie Rollover that I used to show at some of the conferences when I first started on the speaking circuit. And in that movie where the financial markets collapse, the head trader at the bank that's portrayed as one of the lead banks in New York City says, put down the phones, listen up. They're selling everything. Currencies, no positions. Bullion, grab what you can get and pray. It's the exact lines from the movie. So he knew that you didn't want any currencies because the fluctuations would go back and forth, but at the end of the day, they all burn in a pile of wood, right? So, but bullion, grab what you could get. If anyone was stupid enough to sell gold for currency, grab it and pray. Now, is it going to get that bad? No, but that's a metaphor. That's an extreme thought to get people to wake up, because the other part of your question was, why does only 1% own it? Because they are taught nothing about money. They're taught nothing about finance. And you get some of these really well-known, well-published people that do large commentary on finance, but they're all establishment. Stock market goes up over the long term. Real estate goes up over the long term. You never hear the word precious metals, gold or silver in the mainstream economic teachings. If you go outside and try to financially educate yourself, and I won't name names, but you know who I'm talking about, they proliferate the news channels and the financial propaganda press and tell you just save your money, put it in the stock market, and you're going to be wonderful. It's not true. I'm not against stocks. I started investing in stocks when I was 16 years old. But the point is, metals are absolutely essential, especially during times like these. We are not facing a 1 in 40-year crisis where the currency changes again. We're facing a 1 in 400-year crisis where we have weather problems, political turmoil, almost a revolutionary atmosphere. And is it based purely on the fiat monetary system? No, but it has a great deal more to do with it than most people realize. And only looking back from a true historian that will write the truth, we hope we have one of those or two of those or three of those, will you recognize that the destruction of the currency destroys the moral fiber of the society at large and inundates this, let's say, moral decay to such a level that you have at some points, and I don't want to say it, but it's true, chaos in the streets. More, Brian, sorry to interrupt, but if you had an educated population and 10% of the population owned gold instead of 1%, and the price right now we're talking was, let's just make up a number for illustration purposes, 25,000 an ounce, you would probably have a different monetary background than what we have now. Because with that percentage of the population holding gold as a wealth preservation asset or a foundational asset to their entire well-being, financial well-being, I think you wouldn't get the ability of the powers that be to print money like there's no tomorrow, print currency, I should say, like there's no tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was about to say, you mentioned the point of education, and we just don't educate our people. And one of the reasons is that I think governments, central banks, that they want to have the gold, but they don't want the people to have the gold. And just brought me to a point. I was listening to a podcast during the week, a great gentleman who's been in the industry for a long time, and I won't name the name, but he's been with a prominent company in Canada. But he's just retired. What he said was he was so grateful to retire, so-called retire. But as soon as that retirement came from the financial body that he was with, he was unshackled to say what he really wanted to say. And one of the points was, do not ever go into an unallocated position in gold or silver.
Look, David, I agree 100%. Mainstream media never make reference to gold in a positive way. I mean, I was watching the news, mainstream media, last couple of nights ago, and gold had taken a little bit of a dip. It had fallen well under 1,800, and they took advantage of that. Yeah, gold's on a big dive here. Gold continues to fall. But it's recovered, of course. It went back over 1,800 US. No reference. I highlighted it on the screen, but there was no reference to that movement at all. And no wonder, you know, once again, the populace at large have no real idea as to the value in investing in precious metals. And I keep on bringing up this illustration all the time, David, and I'm glad I do, because, you know, I keep on getting feedback, people saying, Darryl, I haven't heard that before, or I didn't pick up on that before. And I've mentioned it a couple of times on our interviews, and once with yourself, I believe. But Brian and I have really dug deeply into this. And I just want to go over it again. I just want to clarify. I want people to understand how good an investment gold is. You can go back. Anybody, if they dispute these numbers that I'm about to quote, they can go and have a look anytime they like, and they'll find them to be absolutely and totally correct. But gold in Aussie dollars and US dollars there's not much difference. Gold in Aussie dollars is up just over 27% average per year over the last 20 years. We've got to keep that in mind, just up over 27%. But I'm going to say, let's just say that gold didn't perform as well over the next 20 years as it has in the last 20. I think it'll do a lot better. In fact, I'm sure it'll do a lot better, and I'm sure you'd be on my side there, David. But let's say it didn't, and let's say it averaged 20% per annum over the next 20 years. You could invest $500,000. People say, well, $500,000, that's an enormous amount of money. It's a lot of money, of course it is. But I know people, and I'm sure Brian does, and I'm sure you do, David, and I bet a lot of our viewing audience know people who have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 properties worth $500,000. But let's just focus on one for the moment. And you just left your investment in gold for 5 years. At 20% a year, it's worth $1 million. Now, on $1 million, say in 5 years' time, assuming that gold continues to grow at 20% per annum, you could liquidate at 20% per year. It's $200,000 a year, and you wouldn't impact on the balance of your account at all. Now, we know this is the case because this is what we have been doing, and the results are outstanding. Now, if you compare that to real estate, and you've got a $1 million real estate property, you own it freehold, the best in this country, certainly here in South Australia, that you're going to do is the best return you're going to get is around $35,000, maximum $40,000 a year in rent on that property. So we're talking a comparison here between $40,000 and $200,000 a year. There is no comparison. So, and yet, mainstream media talk up property all of the time. They'd need to with those returns, wouldn't they, Brian?
They certainly
but
they do.
You know, unbelievable. And by the way, with reference to the properties, you've got council rates that you need to attend to. You've got ongoing maintenance, renovations. So gold and silver, and by the way, silver, I believe because of the ratio at the moment that silver could be, and I expect it to be, it to provide better returns over the next few years than gold will. So it could even be a better result for you. So your thoughts here, David? I mean, it's staggering, isn't it, really?
Two thoughts, because I want to come back to Brian. But there is a friend of mine that runs a bullion facility, rather substantial one. I've known him for years in Canada, and he did like this gold chart book. And it shows over the last 20 years, same references you just talked about, Darryl, that gold over that 20 years would be X values. The S&P index would be 1/2 X, and the Bloomberg index of bonds would be about half of that. So over the last 2 decades, gold has outperformed the S&P, which is a really good index. I mean, most money managers cannot beat the S&P 500. It's twice as good as the S&P 500, and it's roughly almost 5 times better than a bond fund. So there you have it. You gave the real estate example. I gave you the stock and the bond example. And yet, as Brian said, why do only 1% of the population own gold? I want to go back to the last comment that Brian made, and that's unallocated. Hopefully you guys don't mind. I do have a strong relationship with As Good as Gold Australia. I will be putting it out on my mailing list with the discount code, so everyone knows what it is. Make sure you sign up for my free newsletter at themorganreport.com. But I just did an interview this morning with Robert Keynes of Gold Silver Pros, and we went through unallocated in a rather fairly deep dive, I'll call it. And I brought up, the show screen feature, and I brought to his attention, which I think he was aware of 2 very old pieces of news. One was from UBS and one was from Morgan Stanley. And in both cases, these banks were selling silver, storing silver, charging for storage, and they didn't have silver. They didn't even have a storage facility. And what happened? Well, they were fined. They paid currency. But you don't buy metals for currency. You buy metals because you don't want currency. You want to hedge against currency. But the thing about this article that I read and quoted, which was so unbelievable to me, was that one of these banks made this statement to the effect that this is standard operating procedure in the metals business. This is the way that it's done, as if that was an excuse to fraud people, and it's okay because it's pervasive throughout the industry. Those are my words, but that's what it implied. You can watch the video. I'm not trying to take away from our discussion, and you don't have to go there. What I'm pointing out is unallocated. If you own it and you think you own something, you might. But I would say you better rethink it. And during that discussion, I asked Robert what would be the best process. He said he has a number of clients, associates that are trying to move from unallocated into allocated. He said, just one example, I don't want to make a federal case out of one example, continues to be stalled, delayed, excuses, and everything else, moving to physical metal. His suggestion, and mine as well, is if you have an unallocated account and you can turn it into currency, do so ASAP, turn around and immediately put that currency with the dealer into an allocated, or better yet, segregated account with somebody you can trust. That would be my strong recommendation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Along those lines of storage and vaulting costs as against, let's say, home rates, for council rates and things like that. Yeah, in Australia, I'm not quite sure what it is in America, but we charge, because we run our vault as well as the bullion dealership, is that we would charge a client who has $1 million in gold $200 a year. That's basically what it costs to put your valuables, $100 million of gold, $200 a year. So maintenance costs, they're very little. And we've got our vault is 2 floors below ground level, got all the bells and whistles. It's a very safe environment. Darryl?
Yeah. David? Thank you once again. Look, really appreciate your input. And certainly over the next 12 months, we're really looking forward to working with you at As Good as Gold Australia. I guess if I can remind our viewers to please subscribe so that you will be first up so far as receiving information with new products that we'll introduce, and of course specials, as I mentioned before. Thank you again, David. Thank you so much for supporting us and working with us at As Good as Gold Australia. Thank you to our subscribers. Really appreciate their support over many years now. And so I can only say Until next time, stay well, stay focused. Goodbye for now.
Goodbye for now.